Hello, and welcome to Deadly Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Tony. In this podcast, I am going to be talking about the paranormal, ghosts, legends, folklore, and supernatural creatures. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show, and thank you for listening. In tonight's episode, I'm going to tell you 4 different stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy all 4 of these scary stories. Whether they're true or not, but they are local legends. And there's always some truth to a legend. The Sensabaugh Tunnel. Now, this legend has 3 different stories to it. Not sure which is the most accurate. But at the end, let me know what you think. Sensabaugh Tunnel was built in 1920 and was named for the man that owned the land, Edward Sensabaugh. In one version of this legend, Edward let a homeless man into his home as an act of charity. Their guest tried to steal jewelry, and Edward confronted him with a gun. The thief grabbed Edward's baby daughter to use as his shield and ran out of the house. He got away and drowned the baby in the tunnel. In a second version of this legend, Edward Sensabaugh himself went mad and killed his entire family and threw their bodies into the tunnel. But in the third version, some claim that it's the most accurate. Edward Sensabaugh lived into his old age, not dying until the 1950s, and had none of his children die as babies. But by the time Edward grew old, vandals and teens had taken to using the tunnel for their fun. Edward wasn't happy about it, so he would hide at one end of the tunnel and fill it with an eerie shriek, scaring off anyone hiding inside, thus beginning the legend of Sensabaugh Tunnel. Legend has it, if you switch off your car's engine in the middle of the tunnel, it won't start back on. Some say you can also hear the baby's cry and the approaching footsteps of Edward himself. Some have even claimed when driving through the tunnel, the shadow of a woman appears in your back seat. Now, are you brave enough to visit Sensabaugh Tunnel? Let me know. Our next story is going to be about the Road to Nowhere Tunnel. In the 1930s and 1940s, Swan County gave up the majority of its private land to the federal government for the creation of Fontana Lake and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Fontana Lake is actually a reservoir for Fontana Dam, which was built as a TVA project during the World War II to produce electricity for Alcoa aluminum plants in Tennessee, as well as the Oak Ridge National Laboratory's Manhattan Project. Hundreds of people were forced to leave the small Smoky Mountain communities that had been their homes for generations. With the creation of the park, their homes were gone, and so was the old highway 288, the road to these communities. The old road was buried beneath the deep waters of Fontana Lake. Fontana Facts and History. The federal government promised to replace Highway 288 with a new road. Lakeview Drive was to have stretched along the north shore of Fontana Lake, from Bryson City to Fontana, 30 miles to the west, and of special importance to those displaced residents, it was to have provided access to the old family cemeteries where generations of ancestors remained behind. But Lakeview Drive fell victim to an environmental issue, and construction was stopped. With the road ending at the tunnel, about 6 miles into the park, the environmental issue was eventually deemed too expensive, and the roadwork was never resumed. And Swain County's citizens gave the unfinished Lakeview Drive its popular, unofficial name, the Road to Nowhere. Now, what makes this tunnel creepy and fall into my paranormal is, for one, don't go into the woods at dark. That just makes me want to go. Being a paranormal investigator and all, people have claimed to experience a glowing orb while hiking the nearby Nolan Creek Trail. The Nolan Creek Trail has numerous abandoned homesteads and cemeteries that bear the name of many pioneers that settled the land that now lies under the deep waters of the Fontana Lake. You can imagine sad stories of land lost, homes and grave sites associated with this place. One such features an early farmer who died while searching for his lost daughter. This story gave rise to the legend of an eerie lantern that is said to appear and guide lost hikers to safety at the trailhead. Most decidedly a scary but welcome sight on a dark, cold night in the vast forest. Also, it is said that Spearfinger is to prowl the shadows around this tunnel. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, you need to. Also, Ben said that you can hear drums being played. Now, at a dark, creepy tunnel at night, hearing drums, would you dare to go check out the Road to Nowhere tunnel? Who knows? Maybe you'll see the ghostly lantern. Or maybe you'll run into Spearfinger herself. Do you dare to go check out the Road to Nowhere tunnel? I myself have been there at night, and let me tell you, it's very creepy. Now, our third story is going to be about a bridge. This bridge is called Drummond Bridge. Drummond Bridge is part of a railway system that transported coal from the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s in eastern Tennessee. The bridge itself crosses over Coal Creek, a namesake of the goods used to move from state to state. At first glance, the abandoned railway trestle is pretty unassuming and only looks like a forgotten part of Tennessee history, left to be reclaimed by nature. However, the bridge is deemed to be one of the most haunted places in all of Tennessee. Over the years, stories and rumors of the bridge have been passed around from friend to friend through families and locals. Once you learn about the bridge's blood-stained past, it's easy to see why so many rumors of its haunting are circulating. The story begins a couple of years before 1893, during the time known as the Coal Creek War, which was an armored labor uprising in the area. This labor conflict ignited in 1891 when coal mine owners in the Coal Creek watershed began to remove and replace their company-employed private coal miners, then on the payroll, with the convict laborers leased out by the Tennessee state prison system. The former wage-earning Coal Creek miners repeatedly attacked and burned both state prison stockades and mine properties in the area, all while releasing hundreds of the state convict laborers from their bondages, essentially setting the prisoners free. Many of the protesters were also wounded and killed during the war, along with dozens of Tennessee state militia. The Coal Creek War is described as one of the earliest and most dramatic episodes in American labor history. The Coal Creek War was itself part of a greater labor struggle that was happening across Tennessee at the time. The entirety of the convict leasing system was being questioned as human rights were brought up, and the similarities to slavery were starting to be addressed. This system also began to suppress employee wages and the open market because the businesses could essentially hire prisoners for pennies to perform the same work as they paid their employees. Although the Coal Creek War essentially ended with the arrest of hundreds of coal miner owners and the adverse exposure that this state conflict generated led to the overall downfall of Tennessee's then governor, John P. Buchanan. However, the protesters did end up getting their way when the Tennessee state government refused to renew its convict labor lease contract with private businesses upon their expiration dates. This made Tennessee one of the first southern states to end this unfair and controversial practice. However, it was one instance of a life lost that has dubbed this bridge a haunted hotspot. Richard Drummond, a 25-year-old coal miner in the area, was a part of the Coal Creek War and the labor uprising. Drummond reportedly killed a soldier and was sentenced to death by hanging. Instead of waiting for the long arm of the law to bring justice to the estranged Drummond, a governor-sent militia man hung Richard from the steel supports of the bridge, leaving him to die. Rumors of a love triangle surrounded the hanging, and the rumors began to arise that it was the reason that Drummond was killed so personally. Still, details evade us. When searching for answers about the supposed scorned lovers, eventually 16 officers and enlisted men were arrested and tried for the murder of Drummond. The trial lasted for weeks due to the fears that the renewed violence and hostility from the miners would return once the judge delivered the verdict. Today, the bridge is haunted by Richard, and the visitors to the location report hearing disembodied, gasping breaths. Others seen an apparition pacing from one end of the bridge to the other. Even nearby cattle are affected by the haunting, avoiding grazing in the field below the bridge and the dogs that refuse to cross it. Legends also say that visitors can hear Drummond's cries if they hold still and stay really quiet. The notches where the hanging took place are also still visible, giving a stark reminder of the dangers of the needless revenge. Many visitors to the bridge state that the urgencies there just seem off. Locals tend to avoid the bridge entirely, while paranormal investigators flock in hopes of capturing proof of the afterlife. I've been to this bridge. I haven't gotten much, but it gives off such a creepy vibe. This next story is about Crazy George's Bridge. Now, I don't know if this is a true story or just another local legend, but here goes. After leaving the pie supper at Woodcliff Baptist Church on a Saturday night in the spring of 1931, George walked, some say stumbled, but we won't speculate here, towards his home in the valley below. During this trek, he stopped at the watchtower station above a small bridge, underneath which the railroad quietly snaked before the tracks disappeared into the hills beyond. While there, the watchman insisted that George spent the night, instead of walking the treacherous railroad bed which offered a shortcut to his family home. Being engaged to wed just 1 week on, George declined the offer and instead continued his travels, ensuring he made it to breakfast the next morning, as this would be one of the last home-cooked meals from Mother and his foreseeable future. The breakfast table was indeed set the following morning, but George's chair lay empty. As you might have guessed, from here, our tale leaves the happy world of Mama's meals and pie suppers. You see, though the sun came up as usual the next morning, darkness fell over the valley. In the early hours of that Sunday, the same watchman from the night before began his daily check of the tracks. After a short walk, he was surprised to find a hat, then a watch, then George. While we won't share all the details here, I'm sure you can figure out what happened while George walked the tracks, and imagine in the full nature of the horrifying scene. Understandably terrified and distraught, the watchman burst into the same church which just hours before hosted a merry pie supper to interrupt the services with the news of the tragedy. George's betrothed happened to be in attendance. Upon hearing George's fate, she stood and fainted, reminiscent of a sweltered Southern belle from early Hollywood. However, her dismay seems to have been short-lived, as she wed another just a few weeks later. This quick marriage caused rumors to swirl. Legends were born, and over time, Crazy George's Bridge came to life. To this day, it is said that on certain nights, a headless traveler is seen carrying a lamp along the tracks, which run beneath the bridge. Whether this is the scorned, murdered, and angry ghost of George, or a work of fiction, or another nameless ghoul hunting the hills, we caution you, don't stay long on Crazy George's Bridge. And that brings me to the end of our stories. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about each story, or which one was your favorite. And until next time, we'll see you later, and rest easy.